Chapter 9. Friction. Introduction. Why does applying brakes ultimately cause a car to stop? Why does stepping on an oily surface cause you to slip? Why is it so tough for you to walk on a flat surface? Why does a ball that is weakly struck by a batsman eventually stop on its own? Let's investigate the responses to these queries. The force of friction is the reason. If an object needs an outside force to move it over a level surface, stopping it also requires an outside force. A person or an obstruction may apply this stopping force. Moving objects eventually come to a stop or come to rest in the absence of such visible pressures. The frictional force or force of friction is the name for this undetectable force. Friction. Friction is the constant force that prevents one thing from moving relative to another that is in contact with it. When we lightly push a book across a table, it will move for a while before coming to a stop. It indicates that a force is applied to the book's surface by the table's surface that prevents the book from moving and causes it to halt. Friction is the force that prevents the book from moving on the table. Similar to how we slow down a bicycle every time we use the brakes. The brake pads of the bicycle do not make contact with the wheels when it is in motion. The wheels of the bicycle's rims scrape against the brake pads as we pull back on the brake lever to apply brakes to the moving bicycle. The wheels can't move forward because of the friction created by the rubbing of the brake pad against the rim. The result of this is that the running bicycle eventually comes to a stop. A vehicle would never cease moving if there was no friction in the air. Therefore, the force that prevents an object from moving is called friction. Every time two surfaces come into touch with one another, friction is created. Friction is a contact force as a result. Direction of force of friction. The relative motion between two surfaces in contact is always opposed by the force of friction. It consistently resists any applied force, whether it is a push or a pull. As a result, the direction in which an object travels or tends to move is constantly opposed by the force of friction. Causes of friction. Any surface, even one that seems smooth to the unaided eye, contains numerous imperfections when viewed under a microscope. They resemble hills and grooves in their irregularity. The imperfections on the surfaces of two surfaces that move over one another become fixed. Interlocking of imperfections between two surfaces is what this is. Friction develops between the surfaces of the items as a result of the two surfaces interlocking imperfections, which also slows or opposes the motion of one object over the other. We must exert force to move one object over another in order to dislodge the interlocking imperfections on their surfaces. When enough power is applied, the irregularities interlocking breaks and the object begins to move, overcoming the frictional force that was previously resisting it. Therefore, in order to move an object over another object or surface, we must exert a force that is larger than the frictional force acting on the two surfaces. When a wooden block is positioned on top of a rough surface and when we pull a wooden block, the surface imperfections on the block's surface lock with the imperfections on the rough surface where the block is resting. The movement of the wooden block over the rough surface is resisted by the friction created by the interlocking of the imperfections. Only when we exert enough muscle power while pushing the wooden block to dislodge the imperfections and defeat the opposing frictional force will we be able to move the block. Only when the pulling force exceeds the frictional force between the surfaces will the wooden block start to move. Factors affecting friction. 1. Nature of two surfaces in contact. For every surface, friction varies. It depends on how smooth or rough the surfaces are that are coming into contact. We are aware that when two items come into touch, their surfaces will interact and generate friction. More irregularities exist on rough surfaces than on smooth ones. Therefore, friction is more powerful on rough surfaces than it is on smooth ones. Let us understand this with the help of the following activity. 2. Force with which two surfaces are pressed together. The interlocking of imperfections between the two contacting surfaces is what generates force. When two surfaces of items are forced together more firmly, friction increases. Because of the increased interlocking of the two surfaces imperfections, when we apply more force, friction between the surfaces likewise rises. Types of friction. There are three types of friction. They are as follows: static friction, sliding friction, rolling friction. Static friction. It is the type of friction that does not allow an object kept on a surface to move. For example, try to move a heavy box or cupboard. Are you able to move it? If you apply more force with the help of others, it will move. The frictional force between the box and the floor is static friction. Static friction can be measured with the help of a spring balance. It is a device to measure force. It contains a spring attached to a pointer on a scale and to a hook. When the spring is stretched, the pointer gives the reading of force created by the stretching. Sliding friction. The amount of friction that develops when one object genuinely slides or moves across the surface of another object at a constant speed. In comparison to static friction, sliding friction is weaker. Since of this, it is simpler to maintain an object in motion once it has started moving than to stop it from moving when it is sliding over the surface of another object, since the uneven surface of the other thing prevents the object from coming to rest. Because there is inadequate interlocking of the irregularities of the two surfaces after the object has had enough time to fully lock onto the irregularities on the other object's surface, sliding friction is less than static friction. Therefore, due started moving. Sliding friction is smaller than the static friction. Force required to keep the object moving with the same speed is a measure of sliding friction. Rolling friction. The friction between a curved or a spherical object and a surface is called rolling friction. If you use a small rectangular block instead of the battery, how would your observation change? A rectangular object will move less than the battery. Why is that? As we studied earlier, friction is generated when two objects come into contact with each other. More the contact, more will be the friction. In other words, friction depends upon the surface area of the objects. In a rectangular box, more surfaces are in contact with the other surface, whereas a battery has less surface area. Due to its curved surface, less of it is in contact with the other surface. Hence, the battery moves farther due to lower friction. Rolling friction is always smaller than the sliding friction. In fact, circular objects are used in machines to reduce friction. It is due to this reason that the invention of wheel is said to be of immense importance. A wheel is circular, so when it moves on the ground, contact between the wheel and ground is very less. This leads to less friction and helps the wheel to move easily. Factors affecting friction. Since friction is a contact force, it depends on the properties of the surfaces in contact. In general, it is affected by the following. Type of surface. If the surfaces in contact are very smooth, there will be very little friction. For example, a marble rolled on a glass surface will move much faster than on a wooden or concrete surface. Surface area of an object. A circular object will produce rolling friction which is much less than the friction produced by a rectangular or flat-surfaced object. Mass of an object. A heavy object will produce more friction than a lighter object of the same surface area. It is more difficult to move a filled box than an empty one. This happens because the heavy object gets tightly interlocked with the surface below it than a lighter object. State of motion of an object. It is easier to move an object already in motion than an object at rest. If you have ever noticed people pushing a car or a bus, you will realize that initially they have to push very hard to make the car move. Once it starts moving, force required to keep it moving is less. Friction in our lives. Friction is behind many important things that we do. It also has certain disadvantages. It is said that friction is a necessary evil in our life. Advantages of friction. Walking. Walking is a basic necessity in our life. Friction helps us to walk. When we walk, our feet or shoes get interlocked with the ground and generate friction. This prevents us from slipping. Now, can you guess why walking on ice or oil is difficult? Or why does a person slip on a banana peel? This is because these are smooth surfaces and our feet are not able to lock with them. As a result, as we step on such a surface, our foot moves forward, making us fall. Moving vehicles, friction is generated between tires or wheels and the road surface. This helps to control the vehicle. If there were no friction, the vehicle would move too fast and go out of control. For this reason, there are grooves on the surface of tires. To write, we are able to write because of friction between the paper and the tip of a pen or pencil. Due to this friction, the ink gets transferred on the grooves of paper. Try writing on a glass surface or glazed paper with a pencil. What happens? Why? To light fire. Man discovered fire by rubbing stones together. How did this happen? When two objects slide past each other, they have to overcome friction. In this process, heat is produced. In fact, friction always produces heat. When the stones were rubbed with force, lot of heat was produced, giving rise to sparks. This led to the discovery of fire. Even today, fire is always produced by friction. A matchstick is made up of a chemical substance with rough surface. The side of a matchbox also has rough surface. When the head of the matchstick is rubbed with this surface, the chemical lights up due to heat produced by friction. To make furniture, friction helps a carpenter to cut wood with a saw or to hammer nails into wood. Without friction, the nails would not hold tightly. Disadvantages of friction. Friction always produces heat. It also involves constant rubbing of surfaces, which damages the surfaces. Some disadvantages of friction are as follows. Wearing out of objects. As said above, when two surfaces are continuously rubbing each other, there is wearing out of surfaces. For example, our shoes and sandals wear out after using them for some time. The soles of the shoes become thin due to constant contact with the floor. Similarly, tires of vehicles wear out due to constant contact with roads. The ridges of tires keep wearing out and need to be replaced periodically. Parts of machines also wear out when they constantly move against each other. Friction produces heat which can accelerate the wearing out of machines. This also results in energy wastage and reduces efficiency of machines. Reducing friction. To increase the efficiency of machines, friction has to be reduced. This is done mainly by applying lubricants and using ball bearings. Lubricants are slippery substances and they help make the surfaces smooth, thereby reducing friction. Another way of reducing friction is to use ball bearings between the parts of the machines. Ball bearings are spherical in shape and hence reduce friction. Friction in liquids and gases. Liquids and gases are together called fluids due to their ability to flow. When an object moves through a fluid, its surface comes into contact with the particles of the fluid. This generates friction. The frictional force exerted by a fluid on an object is called drag. Drag acts in the direction opposite to that of movement of the object. When an object moves through air or a liquid, it has to cut through the fluid to move forward. Hence, drag depends upon the following factors. Shape of the object. While moving in a fluid, an object has to cut through its surface. Imagine if boats were the same shape as a bus. Would they be able to move through water? To cut through water, an object must have a narrow head which can cut through water easily. Have you noted the shape of fish? They have a narrow head which can cut through water easily. A broader middle and again a narrow forked tail to help them change direction in water. Such a shape is called a streamline shape. Planes also have streamline-shaped bodies that help them to cut air easily and move fast. The streamline shape helps to reduce the drag on an object. For this reason, all ships, boats and aeroplanes have streamline shape. Speed of object. An object moving with high speed in a fluid will experience more drag. For this reason, the meteors entering the Earth's atmosphere burn. A meteor enters the Earth's atmosphere at a very high speed. As a result, it experiences high magnitude of drag. This in turn produces excessive heat that burns the meteor. Nature of liquid. The drag created by a fluid depends on its density and viscosity. A more dense and viscous fluid will exert more drag on an object moving through it. For example, Where do you think a toy boat will move faster? In a pool of water or in a pool of melted chocolate? So you have seen how friction is important in our lives. You will learn more about friction in higher classes. In a nutshell, friction is an important contact force. Frictional force exists between two surfaces in contact and it always acts in the direction opposite to motion. Friction is generated when the surfaces of two objects lock with each other. Static friction is a force that does not allow an object at rest to move. Sliding friction is a force that brings a moving object to rest. Rolling friction is the friction between a spherical object and the surface on which it rolls. A smooth surface will generate less friction whereas a rough surface will generate more friction. Friction depends on mass and surface area of an object. Friction always generates heat. This principle is used to make matchboxes and lighters. Friction in fluids is called drag. Streamlined shape of an object minimizes the drag when it moves through fluids.